The Cleveland Browns draft situation has descended into absolute turmoil on Thursday evening, March 6, 2026, with Todd Monken and Andrew Berry locked in an escalating internal power struggle over which prospects to target with the fourth overall pick. And according to sources with direct knowledge of the heated debates happening inside Browns headquarters, the level of dysfunction and disagreement between the head coach and the general manager has reached a point where multiple team executives are privately predicting that either Monken or Berry will resign before the draft happens because they fundamentally cannot agree on draft strategy and because Jimmy Haslam keeps undermining both of them by changing his mind about what he wants every single day. According to sources who've been briefed on the specific disagreements tearing the organization apart, Todd Monken is adamant that the Browns must use the fourth overall pick on a quarterback, specifically targeting either Miami's Cam Ward or Ohio State's Will Howard, because Monken refuses to spend another season trying to scheme around inadequate quarterback play and believes that neither Zach Wilson nor potentially Kirk Cousins, if that trade happens, represents a long-term answer at the position. But according to sources, Andrew Berry is equally adamant that using the fourth pick on a quarterback after the organization just went through months of Shedeur Sanders drama and after they've already acquired two different quarterbacks in the past week would be organizational malpractice, and Berry is instead pushing hard to use the fourth pick on either Penn State offensive tackle Abdul Carter or on Notre Dame quarterback Benjamin Morrison, both of whom Berry views as elite blue-chip prospects who would immediately upgrade Cleveland's roster at premium positions while allowing the team to develop Wilson or to ride with Cousins at quarterback for 2026. The turmoil is so severe, according to sources, that Monken and Berry had a screaming match in Berry's office on Wednesday afternoon that was loud enough that multiple staff members in adjacent offices could hear them yelling at each other about wasting another year and learning nothing from past mistakes and letting ownership dictate football decisions. And according to sources, the top prospects that both Monken and Berry are eyeing have become aware of Cleveland's internal chaos through their agents and through their own connections, and at least two elite prospects have privately told their representatives that they hope Cleveland doesn't draft them because they don't want to start their NFL careers in such a dysfunctional environment where the coach and GM are at war with each other and where the owner changes the plan every 24 hours. The draft turmoil that's consuming the Cleveland Browns organization intensified dramatically over the past 48 hours, according to sources who've been tracking the deteriorating relationship between Todd Monken and Andrew Berry and the cascading dysfunction it's creating throughout the football operations department. According to sources, what started as normal, healthy debate between a head coach and general manager about draft strategy has evolved into something far more toxic and far more destructive, with the two most important football decision-makers in the organization now barely speaking to each other except through tense formal meetings, and with both men apparently positioning themselves to be able to blame the other if the draft goes poorly. The specific timeline of how this turmoil developed begins in the immediate aftermath of the Deshaun Watson trade to the Jets and the subsequent trade with Arizona for the fourth overall pick, according to sources familiar with the sequence of events. According to sources, when those trades were completed on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, both Monken and Berry initially believed they were on the same page about what to do with the fourth pick, with both men supposedly agreeing during meetings with Jimmy Haslam that they would take the best player available regardless of position and would let the board fall naturally rather than reaching for need. But according to sources, that supposed agreement fell apart almost immediately once Monken and Berry started actually evaluating which specific prospects would constitute best player available at fourth overall. According to sources, Monken returned to his office after those meetings with Haslam and immediately began deep-dive film study on the top quarterback prospects in the draft, operating under the assumption that best player available at 4 would almost certainly be a quarterback, given the premium value of the position. But according to sources, Berry simultaneously returned to his office and began having detailed discussions with his scouting staff about non-quarterback prospects who could be worthy of the fourth pick, operating under a completely different assumption about what best player available meant in practice. The breakdown in communication and the emergence of fundamental philosophical differences became apparent on Wednesday morning, according to sources, when Monken and Berry had their first post-trade meeting to begin seriously planning for the draft. According to sources who've been briefed on what happened during that meeting, Monken came prepared with detailed quarterback evaluations and film breakdowns, and he opened the meeting by saying something to the effect of, "I've been studying Ward and Howard intensively, and I think either one of them gives us a legitimate franchise quarterback if we develop them properly. We should make our decision between those two and then spend the next 6 weeks preparing for whichever one we take."
But according to sources, Andrew Berry's response to Monken's quarterback-focused approach was immediate and negative. According to sources, Berry told Monken that taking a quarterback at 4th overall after everything the organization has been through with the Shedeur drama and after acquiring Wilson and potentially Cousins would send a terrible message both internally and externally about organizational stability and coherence. According to sources, Berry specifically argued that we just told the entire world through our actions that we're set at quarterback with Wilson or Cousins, and now you want to use a top 5 pick on the same position we supposedly just addressed. That makes us look like we have no plan and no clue what we're doing. The philosophical divide that emerged from that Wednesday morning meeting centers on fundamentally different perspectives about how to build a competitive NFL roster and about what the Browns' actual competitive timeline should be, according to sources who understand both men's thinking. According to sources, Todd Monken's perspective is that the Browns have been trying to win without adequate quarterback play for years, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results, and that the only way to break this cycle is to draft a quarterback with top-tier potential and commit to developing him properly, regardless of the short-term pain that might involve. According to sources familiar with Monken's arguments during internal debates, he's been making the case that Zach Wilson has already proven he's not a franchise quarterback during his time with the Jets, that Kirk Cousins, if acquired, is a 37-year-old bridge quarterback at best, and that punting on the quarterback position again by using the 4th pick on another position means the Browns will be back in this exact same situation in 2027 or 2028, desperately searching for a quarterback and wishing they drafted one when they had the chance at 4th overall in 2026. But according to sources, Andrew Berry's counter-perspective is that the Browns need to stop gambling on quarterbacks and instead need to build a complete roster with elite talent at every other position, and only then should they add a quarterback into an environment that's actually set up for success. According to sources familiar with Berry's arguments, he's been making the case that the Browns' failures with quarterbacks over the past 2 decades aren't because they've drafted the wrong quarterbacks, but because they've drafted quarterbacks into terrible situations without adequate protection, without adequate weapons, without adequate coaching, and without adequate organizational stability. According to sources, Berry has been arguing specifically that using the 4th pick on Abdul Carter, offensive tackle from Penn State, or Benjamin Morrison, cornerback from Notre Dame, would give the Browns an elite player at a premium position who would make the entire team better immediately, and that developing Zach Wilson or riding with Kirk Cousins for 1 or 2 years while building the roster would put the Browns in position to draft a quarterback in 2027 or 2028 into a much better situation than they could provide for a rookie in 2026. But according to sources, Andrew Berry's response to Monken's quarterback-focused approach was immediate and negative. According to sources, Berry told Monken that taking a quarterback at 4th overall after everything the organization has been through with the Shedeur drama and after acquiring Wilson and potentially Cousins would send a terrible message both internally and externally about organizational stability and coherence. According to sources, Berry specifically argued that we just told the entire world through our actions that we're set at quarterback with Wilson or Cousins, and now you want to use a top 5 pick on the same position we supposedly just addressed. That makes us look like we have no plan and no clue what we're doing. The philosophical divide that emerged from that Wednesday morning meeting centers on fundamentally different perspectives about how to build a competitive NFL roster and about what the Browns' actual competitive timeline should be, according to sources who understand both men's thinking.
According to sources, Todd Monken's perspective is that the Browns have been trying to win without adequate quarterback play for years, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results, and that the only way to break this cycle is to draft a quarterback with top-tier potential and commit to developing him properly regardless of the short-term pain that might involve. According to sources familiar with Monken's arguments during internal debates, he's been making the case that Zach Wilson has already proven he's not a franchise quarterback during his time with the Jets, that Kirk Cousins, if acquired, is a 37-year-old bridge quarterback at best, and that punting on the quarterback position again by using the fourth pick on another position means the Browns will be back in this exact same situation in 2027 or 2028, desperately searching for a quarterback and wishing they'd drafted one when they had the chance at 4th overall in 2026. But according to sources, Andrew Berry's counter-perspective is that the Browns need to stop gambling on quarterbacks and instead need to build a complete roster with elite talent at every other position, and only then should they add a quarterback into an environment that's actually set up for success. According to sources familiar with Berry's arguments, he's been making the case that the Browns' failures with quarterbacks over the past 2 decades aren't because they've drafted the wrong quarterbacks, but because they've drafted quarterbacks into terrible situations without adequate protection, without adequate weapons, without adequate coaching, and without adequate organizational stability. According to sources, Berry has been arguing specifically that using the 4th pick on Abdul Carter, offensive tackle from Penn State, or Benjamin Morrison, cornerback from Notre Dame, would give the Browns an elite player at a premium position who would make the entire team better immediately, and that developing Zach Wilson or riding with Kirk Cousins for 1 or 2 years while building the roster would put the Browns in position to draft a quarterback in 2027 or 2028 into a much better situation than they could provide for a rookie in 2026.
The specific top prospects that are at the center of this Monken-Berry divide have been scouted extensively by both men and the respective staffs, and the evaluations revealed genuinely different assessments of talent and fit, according to sources who've seen the Browns' internal scouting reports. According to sources, Todd Monken's quarterback evaluations focus heavily on Cam Ward from Miami and Will Howard from Ohio State as the 2 prospects he believes could succeed in Cleveland. The Cam Ward evaluation, according to sources who've seen Monken's notes, includes extensive praise for Ward's arm talent, his mobility, his creativity in extending plays, and his competitiveness. According to sources, Monken views Ward as someone who could thrive in Monken's offensive system, which emphasizes creating explosive plays through a combination of scheme and quarterback playmaking. But according to sources, Berry and his scouting staff have concerns about Ward's size. He's listed at 6'2", which is adequate but not ideal, his decision-making under pressure, and whether his college success was more a product of playing in an elite system with elite weapons than a reflection of his individual talent. The Will Howard evaluation, according to sources, is similarly divided, with Monken viewing Howard as a more traditional pocket passer with excellent size, 6'4", good arm strength, and the intelligence and work ethic to develop into a franchise quarterback with proper coaching. But according to sources, Berry's scouting staff has flagged concerns about Howard's accuracy on intermediate throws, his tendency to hold the ball too long, and whether his college production was inflated by playing behind an elite offensive line at Ohio State. The non-quarterback prospects that Andrew Berry is pushing hard for at 4th overall represent a different philosophy entirely, according to sources familiar with Berry's thinking. According to sources, Berry's top target, if Monken could be convinced to go non-quarterback, would be Abdul Carter, the Penn State offensive tackle, who's considered one of the best offensive line prospects to come out in recent years. According to sources who've reviewed Berry's evaluation of Carter, Berry views him as a potential decade-long cornerstone at left tackle who could protect Cleveland's quarterback, whoever that ends up being, and who could be the foundation of building one of the league's best offensive lines when combined with the recently acquired Titus Howard. But according to sources, Todd Monken has expressed skepticism about using the 4th overall pick on an offensive tackle when the Browns just traded significant assets to acquire Titus Howard at right tackle, arguing that doubling down on offensive line in the same offseason while ignoring quarterback doesn't make sense. According to sources, Monken has told Berry and others in meetings that you can have the best offensive line in NFL history, but if your quarterback can't read defenses and can't make accurate throws, you're still not scoring points. The Benjamin Morrison alternative that Berry has also proposed involves using the 4th pick on what Berry believes is an elite cornerback prospect from Notre Dame, according to sources familiar with Berry's evaluation. According to sources, Berry views Morrison as someone who could immediately become Cleveland's #1 cornerback and who could transform the defense's ability to match up against elite receivers across the AFC. But according to sources, Monken has been dismissive of the idea of using a top 5 pick on a cornerback, arguing that cornerback is not a premium enough position to justify that high of a selection when quarterback needs are so glaring. The screaming match between Todd Monken and Andrew Berry that occurred on Wednesday afternoon in Berry's office has been described by multiple sources who either heard it directly or who were briefed on it afterward by people who were present in the building. According to sources, the confrontation started as a continuation of their ongoing disagreement about draft strategy, but escalated when Monken apparently questioned Berry's competence and decision-making, given all the roster chaos that's occurred over the past month. According to sources who've been told what was said during the argument, Monken at some point told Berry something along the lines of, "You've made so many bad decisions over the past month that I don't trust your judgment on this draft pick. You talked us into the Shador plan, then you talked us out of it. You made the Titus Howard trade that hamstrung our cap. You executed the Watson and the Murray deal that left us with a quarterback room nobody wanted. And now you want me to trust you that we should pass on a quarterback at 4? Why should I believe you know what you're doing when your track record lately is terrible?" According to sources, Berry's response to Monken's attack was equally aggressive and personal. According to sources, Berry fired back with something like, "Every single one of those decisions you just criticized was either forced on me by Jimmy Haslam overruling me or was made in consultation with you and with your full support at the time. You're trying to rewrite history and blame me for organizational dysfunction that you've been part of. And the reason I don't want to draft a quarterback at 4 is because I've watched you fail to develop quarterbacks for your entire career. You want a quarterback to scheme around, rather than actually coaching the players we have." The argument, according to sources, continued for several more minutes, with both men making increasingly personal attacks before finally being interrupted when Jimmy Haslam himself apparently walked into Berry's office unannounced and demanded to know what the yelling was about. According to sources, both Monken and Berry awkwardly tried to downplay the argument to Haslam, but according to sources, Haslam wasn't fooled and told both men that he expected them to figure this out professionally or he would make the decision for them. The top prospect's awareness of Cleveland's internal turmoil has come through multiple channels, according to sources who represent or work with elite draft prospects. According to sources, agents for both Cam Ward and Will Howard have been contacted by sources within the Browns organization. It's unclear if these are Monken allies or Berry allies, who've shared information about the internal disagreements and the organizational chaos. According to sources, those agents have conveyed the information to their clients, and both Ward and Howard are now aware that if Cleveland drafts them, they'll be walking into a situation where the head coach and GM are at war, and where organizational stability is questionable at best.
Similarly, according to sources, Abdul Carter's representatives have been told by sources connected to NFL scouting departments that Cleveland's dysfunction makes them a risky landing spot for a young offensive lineman whose development could be stunted by constant coaching changes and organizational chaos. According to sources, at least 2 top prospects in this draft have privately told their agents that they hope Cleveland passes on them because they don't want to start their careers in such an unstable environment. The Jimmy Haslam factor that's making this turmoil even worse involves the owner continuing to change his mind about what he wants the Browns to do with the fourth pick, according to sources who've tracked Haslam's shifting positions. According to sources, on Monday, Haslam was telling people he wanted the Browns to draft a quarterback. On Tuesday, after the trades, Haslam was telling people he wanted them to take the best player available regardless of position. On Wednesday morning, Haslam was reportedly leaning toward offensive tackle after talking to someone who convinced him that building the line should be the priority. And by Wednesday evening, according to sources, Haslam was back to wanting a quarterback after reading something about how the draft's QB class is being undervalued. This constant shifting from Haslam makes it impossible for Monken and Berry to feel confident about any decision they make, according to sources, because they both know that Haslam could overrule them at any moment based on whatever the last person he talked to convinced him to think. According to sources, this dynamic is a major contributor to the Monken-Berry tension because both men are trying to position themselves to avoid blame if Haslam makes a decision that turns out poorly. As of now, Thursday evening, March 6, 2026, the Cleveland Browns are in complete draft turmoil, with Todd Monken and Andrew Berry locked in fundamental disagreement about whether to use the fourth overall pick on a quarterback, Monken's preference, or on a non-quarterback blue-chip prospect, Berry's preference. The dysfunction has reached the point of screaming matches and personal attacks. Top prospects are aware of the chaos, and some are hoping Cleveland doesn't draft them. Jimmy Haslam's constant mind-changing is making the situation worse. Either Monken or Berry could resign before the draft if this isn't resolved. The Browns' inability to make coherent draft decisions despite having a top 5 pick represents organizational dysfunction at its absolute peak. Whether this turmoil gets resolved through one side winning the argument, through compromise, or through someone leaving the organization remains to be seen. But the damage to the Browns' reputation and to their ability to execute their draft strategy effectively is already severe and will have lasting consequences regardless of who they select. Browns in total draft turmoil, with Monken demanding QB, Ward or Howard, while Berry demands non-QB, Carter or Morrison. Wednesday screaming match in Berry's office heard by multiple staff. Monken attacked Berry's recent decisions. Berry fired back, blaming Haslam and Monken's developmental failures. Arguments so personal, both men may resign before the draft. Top prospects are aware of the chaos through agents, some hoping Cleveland passes on them. Haslam changes mind daily, Monday QB, Tuesday BPA, Wednesday OT, Wednesday night QB again, making coherent planning impossible. Monken-Berry divide is philosophical. Monken says stop punting on QB. Berry says build complete roster first, then add QB. Ward/Howard versus Carter/Morrison represents different organizational visions. Neither man trusts the other's judgment. Internal sources predict one will resign. Dysfunction at absolute peak despite having pick number 4. Damage to reputation already severe. Resolution unclear. Either one side wins the argument, compromise happens, or someone leaves.